Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast Widowhood Made Me Happier. I'm your host, Tabby Kerwin, and I'm here to chat all things protecting mental health, growing with your grief, and performing at your best. Now, I've got a spoiler alert for you today. It's not something people like to hear, but here it is. Grief will happen. It's true. It's the one thing guaranteed that we will all experience at some point in our life. We will live with grief at some point. Now, that grief doesn't necessarily have to come from the death of somebody. It can be a whole different myriad of losses. It could be not just death, but of a person, but of a pet. It could be the loss of a lifestyle, the end of a friendship, the end of a relationship. It could be the loss of an identity. It could be an anticipatory grief for someone you're caring for. It could be health changes. It could be divorce or unmet expectations. There's so many different ways that grief can come into our life. And it's really, really important that we start to acknowledge this so we can protect ourselves, protect our mental health, and so we can grow with our grief. And with is the key word here, because we can go through these hard things and grow with them. So people don't like to hear it. People don't want to think about it. But we are going to all live with grief at some point. So how about we get on board with this idea and we start to do the things now that will protect our mental health so we have enough resilience and enough capacity to be able to manage those difficult things. Now, capacity is a really key word here. In fact, I'm kind of living in this way that capacity is my word for this year. I always want to make sure I have capacity to help other people, to support people in my chosen family, to support my friends, to support my clients. Capacity is really important, and I have to have enough of that in order to give and help others. And the nature of my work and the nature of my values and what I want to achieve in my mission is that I want to be able to help people to the highest and best standard I can. But that means I have to have capacity first. You might have heard that saying, especially if you travel a lot on aeroplanes, of putting your own oxygen mask on first. And this is so true in life as well. We have to put our own oxygen masks on first, because if we don't, we can't help other people effectively. And I know there's so many people like me, so many people I talk to, especially women that I talk to, around this kind of same age demographic as me, you know, us Gen Xers and millennials as well. And we are so focused on being able to help and support other people, but that often comes at a cost of our own mental health. So let's think about this idea of capacity. What is our capacity? Are we acknowledging the capacity that we have and working within it? So if you think about two people, and you might put two people under exactly the same amount of stress, and one person really thrives and they really excel in what they're doing because of this stress that they're under, and one person completely crumbles under it. Why is it? Two people, two identical sets of situations and stress that they're under, but why are they responding in such different ways? Well, the answer is capacity, okay? How big their stress bucket, if you like, I use that analogy a lot, how big their stress bucket is. And the amount of capacity you have changes every time you go through something difficult or traumatic. So let's think about this. Think about a bucket, okay? Your stress bucket. Think about that. And think about how much stress you can withstand. And you might have a stress signature, which is the way that you act when you're under stress. And for some people, they can become withdrawn. For some people, they might become a little bit shouty. For others, they might cry. There's lots of different ways that we can respond to stress. But think about your stress signature and how much stress have you been under when that stress signature is kicked in. Now, that represents your capacity, okay? That's how much you can withstand. So imagine that if it was a bucket. How big is your bucket that you can fill up with stress as if you're pouring water into it? Now, think back over your life. What difficult or traumatic events have you been through? And they might have been a form of grief or loss. It might have been financial difficulties. It might have been moving homes. It might have been a change of jobs. It could have been so many different things. Every time something has been hard and traumatic, though, your capacity decreases. And therefore, you've got less space, a smaller bucket, if you like, to be able to handle difficult things. So when someone says, I used to be able to manage this really well, but now I can't, that's not because they're weaker. It's not because they're failing. It's because their capacity has changed. And I don't think we do enough to acknowledge the capacity that we have and the amount that we can give to others. But yet we still try and keep giving from this empty pot. We still try and care for people when they're ill, or look after children, or do everything we can for our boss and help our friends out and be there to listen and put their needs ahead of ours. We still try and do it, and we're just giving from this empty cup constantly. So how can we change this? Because hard things are going to happen. We are all going to live with some form of grief at some point. You might already be living with grief in some way. So how can we change this capacity? What can we do to protect ourselves before we actually break? Well, I think one of the biggest things that we have to do on a bigger scale is tackle this whole narrative around mental health, which, if you've heard me talk before, you will know that I just think it's wrong, this whole narrative around mental health, because it is so reactive. We are constantly waiting for someone to experience something difficult before we signpost them to the help that they need. And quite often that help we're signposting them to comes from services that are overstretched and underfunded. Consequently, they might get left on waiting lists for quite a while, or really have to wait a long time to get that help that they need in the way that they need it. But we're waiting for crisis, for burnout, for grief, for loss, for difficult things, and how we react to that with our lack of capacity. We're waiting for that to be the entry point to supporting mental health. But we need to shift this narrative from being so reactive to being protective, because actually there's things that we can do that can help us better manage those difficult things when they happen. The entry point to mental health support shouldn't be burnout. It shouldn't be crisis. It should be long before that, when we go to ourselves, one day I might experience something really difficult. How am I going to manage that? Do I have the capacity for it? And then thinking about how we can increase the capacity at that point before the difficult thing comes along. So how can we increase that capacity? How can we shift that narrative from mental health reaction to protection? Well, firstly, we can create spaces where we can talk about it. I'll talk about it on this podcast, and hopefully you'll take that away, and then you'll start a conversation with someone else. There's a ripple effect from that. The spaces that I create in my membership groups, in my coaching groups, in the clients that I work with, and the workplaces and organizations that I work with, those spaces give permission to protect mental health. That means there's permission to talk about difficult things, not from a place of I've experienced this to how would I experience this? How would I cope? How would I manage? It's just changing that shift in language. I create spaces where there aren't taboo subjects. We can talk about the hard things, whether we've lived through them or not, and there's no judgment either way. We have to be able to think about how would I manage something, and it's preempting these things to know that we have the capacity and to know that we have enough resilience. So we could start building our resilience. We can start thinking about the possibilities for growth and opportunity. We can start focusing on the things that are important to us and align with our strengths and things we enjoy, because actually that's going to give us more capacity, because we're choosing happiness and we're creating space for happiness. We can think about the relationships we have. Do we have the right people around us who will help us to navigate those really hard things when they happen? Because it's not an if, it is a when. Things that are difficult, they will happen, okay? So it is, let's work on a premise of it being when they happen. As I said, spoiler alert, grief will happen to us all. It's just a case of when and in what form, I guess, as well. So we can create these places where hard conversations are allowed. We can build resilience with grief. We can put those foundations in place so they are solid, that we can perform at our best regardless of what life throws at us, because life is going to throw some really hard things at us along the way. So this is why I create these spaces. This is why I have this conversation, because I see so many people whose entry point to mental health support comes at too far down the line. It's reaction. It's once burnout has hit. It's once things are difficult and health has been impacted, be that physically or mentally. It's when relationships have been impacted. It's at a time where it's hard to then build capacity because we're just trying to react to something. We're just firefighting. We're in survival mode. So if we can shift this narrative to protection, it's going to help us to be able to manage grief when it happens, so we can live with it, we can grow with it. And that's what we want. We never get over grief, we never get over trauma and hard things, but we can learn to live with them and to grow with them. And that's what I want to encourage people to do. And that's very much what I have done with my grief, and how I can quite boldly now say widowhood has made me happier, because I really had the capacity to manage the situation when Simon died. And I was forced into that because I had gone through years of mental health issues and I'd been reacting to things. And when I was with Simon, I had learned to protect my mental health. I chose happiness. I created my happiness. And I did it based on this premise that I knew it was possible to be happy, and I didn't always know how to get it, but I knew it was possible. And this framework that I built, the Perform framework, I was embodying it long before it became an actual psychological framework. It's how I recovered from my mental health issues. And I shifted from reacting to mental health when I had suicidal thoughts, when I was living with social anxiety and depression. I shifted from reacting to that to protecting myself for what was going to come next. And I didn't know what was going to come next. I didn't know Simon was going to die. It was only an illness for 4 months. The year before that, I didn't know he was going to die so quickly and so early on in our relationship. But because I've been doing the work on this premise of protecting my mental health, and doing all the things that aligned with knowing what was possible, using hope as a strategy, but anchoring it in real groundwork of exercises, choosing happiness, being grateful, really simple strategies, but all helped me to build my resilience, to focus on what was good for me, to put the right people in place, to choose the family I needed around me. And that family wasn't always blood family. It was friends who became family because I knew they were better for me in my life than actually the hand I'd been dealt on a bloodlines level or a genetic level. So I'd put all those things in place. And because I was protecting my mental health on a daily basis and doing that work on a daily basis, what happened was when Simon was ill and then he died quite quickly in November 2018, when that grief came into my life as a widow, I already had the capacity to manage it. And that doesn't make it any less sad, and it doesn't make it any harder, less hard, I should say. I still have that sadness every single day. It's still hard every single day, but I have the capacity to grow with it. And that's a choice, and it's a conscious choice. And it's a choice that I make every single day, and it's a choice that I encourage other people to make as well. Whether they are living with grief yet, whether they are or have experienced something really traumatic, but I'm creating spaces and hoping to create spaces where people can come in and choose to build capacity and have the hard conversations and build their resilience. So when those hard things happen, like grief, they're better equipped and have the capacity to manage it. Because like I said at the start, grief will happen. So I want you to ask yourself, how much capacity do you have? How much capacity do you have to manage everyday stresses? And how much capacity do you have to manage the really big things and hard things and traumatic things when they happen? Have you got enough capacity to be able to grow with those things rather than crumbling and then spiraling into a place of poor mental health? Because I want to encourage you to think about your capacity and think about how you can grow that capacity. And that might be a conversation with me. It might be entering into spaces such as my Mind Gym membership or something like that. It might be having the right people around you and going out with friends and sitting and having a cup of tea. It might be as simple as that. But think about how you can build your capacity. Do you have the strategies in place to build your resilience, to align your work with your strengths, to use hope as a strategy, to perform at your best? Do you have everything in place to be able to do that so you can protect your mental health and so you can build your capacity for when those hard things happen? Because, like I said, they are going to happen. Now, if you are experiencing poor mental health, if you are struggling living with grief, as always, in the notes for the show, I will put some signposting details for you, but you can head over to theperformexperience.com at any time for some free resources to help you embrace your grief and start that journey of protecting your mental health. There's loads of free stuff over there for you, and I'm always adding to it. So please go over to theperformexperience.com and that will give you a starting point to help you build your capacity. And I will see you on the next episode of Widowhood Made Me Happier.